Chapter 14. Infiltration. I wiped my mouth with the back of my sleeve and kicked dirt over where I had been sick. I turned slowly to take another look at the creature John had felled. Though the arm on its back had finally gone still, its muscles still twitched in various places.
"This is what we're up against? This is what they're doing?"
I asked between nervous breaths. Diane put her hand on my shoulder and squeezed.
"Pretty much,"
she said.
"Come on."
She jerked her head in the direction of the hodgepodge creature below. Diane, John, and Seth climbed over the top of the hill and slid down the side to where the monster lay. I hesitated, but reluctantly followed them down.
"How many shots did it take? 3, 4.
Seth sneered.
This thing wasn't so tough."
Seth kicked hard at the insect-like head. It made a crunching, popping sound as it snapped sickeningly to the side from the blow. John walked to Seth's side.
"Look again,"
he insisted. John gingerly moved the head with his foot and pointed. There were 4 tightly spaced holes on the upper portion of the monster's head. It had taken 4 near-perfect headshots to bring the monstrosity down,
"That might be a problem."
admitted Seth.
Not to mention that our meeting this lovely thing out here means that the people inside the fort know that we're out here.
Diane grimaced.
We should keep moving.
Imagine if they had an army of these things.
Seth whistled, throwing a glance in my direction.
"That's why I'm here to help you destroy this place,"
I grumbled. The sun was starting to go down, and an uncomfortable dusk began to creep across the rugged landscape. The promise of darkness gave us the gift of a stealthier approach, but it also could conceal a surprise attack. I covered my nose and mouth with my hand.
"How did they manage to make this guy?"
I asked, not really expecting an answer.
How do you know it's a guy?
Diane quipped. Without acknowledging Diane's ill-timed joke, John tightened his lips and rubbed his head.
"We'd been watching the group making these monstrosities for a while. They started out rough. At first, they were sewing freshly butchered parts, animals or otherwise, together to see what would function. That method didn't lead to a lot of success."
John knelt and pulled at the human arm erupting from the creature's back.
"As you can see, there are no stitches or cuts of any kind."
John stood and rubbed his hands on his pants legs.
"No, they've done their homework this time. I can only guess at the specifics of how they're doing it, but it must come from a test tube as opposed to a seamstress."
This was my first look at what the military higher-ups of Lude were really doing. My stomach churned with disgust.
"We should get moving,"
I urged.
"It isn't a good idea to stay in one place for too long."
We clambered back over the hill and packed away the rest of our gear in silence. The air of the group had certainly changed. They still weren't a typical group of soldiers or mercenaries, but the others were certainly more focused. For the time being, the light-hearted jabs had trickled to a stop. It was all business now. We decided not to climb back over the hill in order to be less predictable. The eyes of the outpost must have spotted us parachuting in and sent that test subject to intercept us. Going a different way was strategically sound, but I was also grateful that I didn't have to pass by that monstrosity again. We didn't plan on knocking on the front door, but we still had to approach the outer perimeter of the base without being seen. Without the light of a nearby city spoiling the night, scrounging our way through the darkness was like wading through tar. It was time to seriously begin our infiltration. Despite my supposed duty as the map, Seth led our attack on the base with me at the rear. Perhaps the others also still saw me as their biggest liability. When I was here, the landscape had been raised in order to prevent an approach like we were performing, but the war had been officially over for years now. Who or whatever was in charge of the fort had gotten careless, and small patches of grass and shrubs had crept back in. One at a time, our group crouched and scurried as silently as possible from stealthy sanctuary to stealthy sanctuary. The landscape was torn and difficult to traverse, but we made good time. Within an hour, we had bridged half the distance to the base. Bringing up the rear, I rejoined the others at the latest rally point. We had come to a scar in the earth that provided us with enough cover to momentarily let our guard down and take a brief rest. We were within 300 feet of Fort Romekin's solid concrete walls. I squinted and ran my eyes back and forth over the ramparts and parapets. Normally, you would expect to see bored soldiers patrolling back and forth, but strangely, the elevated walkways were empty.
No one home.
Diane sniffed.
Not a very welcoming bunch, are they?
John muttered. Seth stood and rotated his arms, stretching.
Shall we let ourselves in?
Grumbled Seth. He removed a pair of steel spikes from his jacket pockets and twirled them in his hands. He didn't wait for an answer. Seth took off, bolting toward the sheer concrete wall. He was a silent blur. He covered the distance to the wall in no more than 10 seconds and barely made a sound as he closed the distance. When Seth reached the wall, he ran up it a few steps and then leaped higher into the air. A loud crack rang out as he drove each of the metal spikes into the concrete wall. He removed one spike, reached upward, and drove it back into the wall. Like a mountain climber, Seth used each spike to spider his way up the concrete barricade. It was an impressive feat, but I wasn't surprised. At this point, it could simply be added to the growing list of evidence that Seth wasn't a normal person. When Seth reached the top of the wall, he removed a length of rope from his pack, fastened it to something, and let it fall down to the ground below. He stood, stretched both his arms, and waved us over.
That's our cue,
said Diane, getting up off the ground.
We'll move the same as before. When one of us gets to the rope, the next of us can make our way over,
she ordered.
Understood,
I responded. John nodded.
Don't hurt yourself,
he cautioned. Diane smiled thinly and dashed toward the rope. It took her longer than it took Seth, but she still closed the distance faster than one would expect a woman of her age to be able to. When she reached the rope, she gave it a quick tug to test it before scrambling up it. As Diane started her climb, John started his run. He bounded slower than Diane, but made it to the rope in a respectable amount of time. Before climbing, he looked back over his shoulder in my direction and gave a quick salute. That was my cue. I sprinted toward the lifeline that would take me away from the danger of being alone and exposed back to the relative safety of the group. I quickly worked my way over rocks and cracks in the ground, keeping my eyes ahead and focused on the wall. I made it to the rope without issue and prepared to pull myself up when I heard a low rumble to my left. I slowly turned my head and was met with another hideous chimera. A wolf-like creature emerged from around the side of the nearest tower that jutted from the base's walls. Wolf-like is the best way I can describe it because it certainly wasn't like any wolf I had seen inhabiting the forests of my home. This was not a majestic or honorable animal. This was a twisted joke. Its patchy fur was a sickly brown. Where there was no fur, its flesh was raised, wet, and red as if it had recently been burned. Cruel-looking spines stuck out in odd places on its back and side. Worst of all, its head was 3 times too large for its body. It limped forward with its heavy head low to the ground. It padded slowly in my direction, its muscles twitching. Its jaw opened and closed, saliva dripped from its maw. As it walked, the beast's neck jolted and jerked unnaturally in several random directions. Up, to the side, up, down, to the side again. It was as if the creature was rabidly rejecting its own existence. I couldn't take my eyes off of the monstrosity.
Rosid!
I heard Diane shout.
Do you want to pet it or something? Hurry up and climb!
Her voice snapped me back to reality. I started up the rope as fast as I could. My hands burned as I fought against gravity. Above me, John started to pull the rope up in order to hasten my ascent. Below me, the snarling knotwolves jumped and snapped at my ankles. It seemed like I would make it without issue, but my companions had their own issues to deal with. 2 more snarling monsters had emerged from the pair of towers on either side of John, Diane, and Seth. Diane unholstered her handgun and began firing at the creature on the left. Seth held tight to one of his metal climbing spikes and leaped forward to engage the beast on the right. He grabbed hold of the creature's oversized head and twisted it to the side, causing the monster to slam onto the ground. Its mouth violently snapped open and closed, aiming to catch anything that happened to slip into their grasp. Its legs and feet flailed wildly in an attempt to escape. Seth brought the wicked metal pick back behind his head before plunging it hard into the creature's skull. The wolf thing let out a high-pitched whine and continued to struggle against Seth's weight. The creature's limbs moved slower and slower until they eventually came to a stop. Diane was having a tougher time dispatching her adversary. As she fired at the creature's face, the bullets either bounced off of or barely penetrated its thick skull. None of her efforts slowed the wolf thing's progress as it padded closer toward her with its jaw unhinged. It rocked back onto its hind legs and leaped at Diane, tackling her to the ground. As she fell, Diane rammed into John, making the rope I was climbing slip from his hands. I fell back toward the gnashing fangs and struggled to hang on as the rope snapped and tugged hard at its support. I swung and bounced hard against the walls. The creatures below me snarled and jumped, aiming to shred whatever flesh they could wrap their jaws around. Struggling to hang onto the rope, I kicked wildly at the creatures as they propelled themselves toward me. I managed to connect a few solid blows to the creatures' heads as they jumped, but it did little to halt their assault on me. Above me on the walkway, John got to his feet and tried to pull the creature off of Diane. The creature largely ignored him and continued its attack on her. She had managed to press her wrists into the beast's throat in order to hold it back from biting her. John gripped the creature's fur and pulled hard, but he wasn't strong enough to budge the beast. Suddenly, one of Seth's metal climbing spikes whistled through the air. The deadly projectile found its mark in one of the monster's eyes. Spurts of blood erupted from the wound and splashed onto Diane's face. The beast reared back and let out a pained moan. It swayed side to side and nipped madly at the air before falling over the side of the wall, where it landed with a sickening crunch. Its companions stopped nipping at my legs and turned their attention to their fallen brother. The duo lumbered hungrily toward its exposed belly and ripped into the flesh. The creatures greedily competed with each other for a share of the meat. The wet sounds of the beasts lapping at the blood and guts made me sick to my stomach, but the monsters had no such qualms about eating one of their own. At least they aren't interested in me anymore, I thought gratefully. I restarted my climb toward the wall's walkway. When I neared the top, John reached down and gave me a hand up.
Are you okay?
He asked.
They didn't bite you, did they?
He eyed my legs with concern like a father looking after his child's scraped knee. I shook my head.
No, they either missed or I kicked them away. They didn't bite me.
Diane pulled out a handkerchief and wiped the blood off of her face.
Good thing, too. For all we know, they could be venomous.
She theorized. I peered over the edge at the two remaining creatures who were busy devouring the dead one.
They don't seem to have any issues with eating their own.
I held my nose. Seth walked over to the beast that had attacked Diane, knelt, and roughly pulled out the metal spike from its eye. It made a gross sucking sound as it slid out of the creature's skull.
They're still just animals. They go after the weakest available prey.
He tossed the spike to the side where it clattered and spun across the floor.
Remember what we told you about them not having full control of everything yet?
I nodded.
What now?
I asked.
Should we try and kill the ones down there?
It isn't worth the effort or ammo.
Explained John.
We have bigger things to worry about.
I don't know about you, but I plan on taking the stairs.
Called Diane. She was gesturing to a tower from where one of the beasts had emerged. After rechecking our equipment, we let ourselves into the guard tower. Technically, we made it into the base. The hard part was over now, right? I thought.